The MiG-19 was an evolutionary design taking the next steps after both the MiG-15 and 17. It was intended right from the start to be supersonic, and Soviet aviation research had two different wing designs it figured would be capable of sustained supersonic flight: a highly swept, thin conventional wing, and a more radical pure delta that we saw later. The swept conventional wing was seen as the lower risk option that would take less time to develop, and it ended up being used in several early 1950s Soviet jets. The plane was intended to be a small interceptor with some dogfighting capability, but the only Soviet engines capable of providing enough thrust were way too large, so it was decided to use a pair of smaller engines for the MiG-19. Earlier versions of the engines still didn't deliver enough power, and were upgraded several times during the prototyping phase, until initial versions of the MiG-19 finally entered service in 1955. Its performance was outstanding, but because of the rush to get into service quickly, there were still a lot of unresolved problems and design flaws, which led to several improved versions coming in quick succession. The Mig-19P was the first radar-equipped version, featuring a redesigned nose, a pair of NR-30 cannons in the wing roots, external weapon pylons, an all-moving tailplane, and some minor aerodynamic refinements. This led to the PF, PM, and PML versions, which all introduced various minor upgrades to the radar and electronic systems, and notably, the PM version was able to carry the K-5 beam-riding air-to-air missile, which we still don't have in Warthunder for some reason. The Mig-19PT was a one-off prototype which modified the missile pylons to accept the K-13, which was the Soviet copy of the Sidewinder missile. The PT didn't enter service as the MiG-21 was already flying by that point, and it mainly served as a test vehicle for integration of the K-13 missile onto existing designs and for testing new versions of the K-13 later on. What we're looking at in Warthunder is the Mig-19PT. This is a jet fighter in rank 6 of the Soviet tech tree at battle rating 9.3 and was one of the first two supersonic jets ever added into Warthunder. The plane carries the SPO-2 radar warning receiver. This is a sensor-based I-band unit with no advanced features at all, but at this battle rating, it can still be relevant. Its radar is the RP5. This is an I-band radar set containing a search dish and a tracking dish that can operate simultaneously. The range on both is very limited, and the search function has no angle or range settings, and it only supports ACM boresight tracking in a small zone directly in front of the aircraft. But the combination of the two dishes gives the jet a basic capability to continue search mode while it's locked onto a target. The primary armament is a pair of very punchy 30mm cannons. I usually opt for the air targets belt, and even with all the real shatter nonsense, these guns still hit very hard. But with only 70 rounds of ammo per gun, you run out pretty quick. For external weapons, the Mig-19PT finally has custom loadouts, and it can take a pair of missiles along with some small bombs or unguided rocket pods. Its air-to-air missile is the R-3S. This is a very basic, entry-level, caged-seeker rear aspect infrared weapon. It only has 10 Gs of pull, and despite what the stat card says, the effective range is barely 2 or 3 kilometers, unless you're firing on a slow-moving bomber that's just going straight and level at high altitude or something. In terms of flight performance, the MiG-19 is a surprisingly good aircraft. It has strong acceleration out to Mach 1, excellent vertical performance, and carrying external weapons only provides a marginal performance penalty. Now, even with that said, there are some weird quirks with this jet. In vertical maneuvers, the MiG-19 retains its energy very well, and it does pretty good in zoom climbs. However, on the horizontal axis, the energy retention isn't quite as strong, even on full afterburners, so you'll want to keep that under consideration. Strong maneuvers for this jet include plain old vertical loops, along with the high yo-yo. while suboptimal maneuvers include horizontal scissors or flat one-circle rate fights if you're not at medium speed. Now, that's a really critical detail in this jet. At high speeds, above 1,000 kilometers an hour or so, the controls lock up really bad, which is going to significantly reduce your turn rates, roll rates, and rudder response. However, if you get too slow, like below 500 kilometers an hour, the controls underperform and you won't have enough energy for more than one maneuver at most. For best results in a sustained fight, you want to try and keep this jet right at around 700 or 800 kilometers an hour whenever possible. And this detail is probably why a lot of people think the Mig-19 can't turn. Most Warthunder players just try to fly on full throttle at all times with maximum WEP, and that really won't work out very well in this plane in a lot of different situations. This jet doesn't get combat flaps, but it's got an air brake that can be pretty helpful if you do get stuck in horizontal scissors and you're trying to force an overshoot, or if you just want to control your airspeed in a dive or something to prevent control compression. It's usually safe to go out with max fuel on most maps, as you'll burn down to a more reasonable weight by the time you get into combat, but flying over a ground battle or on a small map, it's still legit to think about cutting the fuel a little if you really want to min-max that flight performance. Taking the Mig-19PT out in air battles is fairly typical for a fighter jet in this BR bracket, but it's got some advantages. Its flight performance lets it climb much better than comparable jets like the F-100 or the Super Mystere. So even though the normal meta of staying low at the start of a match to try and avoid semi-active radar missiles does still apply, the Mig-19 can climb up to attack someone at higher altitude from below very easily. So if you see someone loitering above you, or if somebody spots you and tries to climb up to evade, don't hesitate to go up after them and attack. Generally speaking though, this jet is a fairly good dogfighter. Your main consideration, as I alluded to a minute ago, is going to be controlling your airspeed and trying to stay at around 800 kilometers an hour while you're engaged in a turning fight. Now, the cannons on this jet are something I want to call out for a moment. They have a weird cyclic rate that I've never been able to get really comfortable with. So even though they have a pretty flat ballistics profile, it can actually be difficult to get deflection shots, as your target is sometimes going to end up flying in between your shots even when you have a correct angle on them. But in flat fire situations like head-ons or chasing down a runner, they're usually pretty accurate and can do a lot of damage. The R3S missile isn't a great weapon, but if you're careful with your shots, you'll still get kills with it. Try and fire within 2 kilometers in most situations, but you can get away with slightly farther shots if your target is out of energy, like stalled in the crest of a loop or something like that. In terms of ground attack, this jet isn't really much of a ground pounder, but it's still able to damage a base or something before going in for air combat, if that's your thing. In terms of close air support, there isn't a ballistics computer and the ammo is very limited for its external weapons. And the external rocket pods are probably going to be your best bet, but you can't really take enough of them to get more than 1 or 2 kills, even in ideal situations. For my 5 cents, just stick to air combat with the Mig-19PT. Visually, I've always found the Mig-19 to be a really appealing jet, and in my opinion, the versions with the azimuth radar on the nose are the best of the bunch. However, the afterburner on this plane just looks awful, and in some places it even clips through the tail if you run on higher video settings. I mean, come on, Snail, this can't be too hard to fix. Landing is fairly straightforward, and you can drop gear at around 550 kilometers an hour and landing flaps around 450. This allows you to land a little hot, and with the jet's poor handling when it gets close to stall speeds, that might not be a bad idea. It's got a drag chute, so the landing run won't be too bad. The cockpit on the Mig-19 gives pretty good visibility, and it felt easy to dogfight in. However, a couple of details really annoy me. It's missing the scope for the azimuth radar set, and the layout of the instruments is incorrect. A minor gripe that 99% of players won't notice, but it really bugs me. to close out on the Mig-19PT. This jet has really good flight performance. It's got a radar set that can scan while tracking, kind of, and its weapons hit pretty hard. However, its overall weapon load is fairly light, and its ground attack potential is limited. The final verdict on the Mig-19PT is that this jet is fun to fly on its own, and it also serves as a really good introduction to more advanced jets while you're going up the tech tree. Don't skip over this one, spend some time with it, and I promise you won't regret it. As always, thanks for watching, and if you enjoyed this video, check out this other one.